It's so beautiful how our understanding of village was just enlarged to a dimension that we can even put in a map or in a graphic, and how gestation, in all its senses, must relate to this enlarged vision of a village. Dr. Lindsay Barnes, when we first talked, you mentioned one notion, if you can say, that I kept with me, that was, you name it as the bigger womb. And I think we are entering this bigger womb while we are opening all these dimensions of gestation. And I think you will get some more details and some more nuances about this to us. Do you want me to? Yeah, I think it should be okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is what I'm planning to speak a little bit about. On the list at the beginning, it said Dr. Lindsay Jane Barnes, and in brackets it said medicine. I think I'm the most non-medicine person in this room, maybe, but I'd let it be at that. So this is yeah. So this is where I come from. I've been living in a village in the northern state of Jharkhand for the last nearly 40 years. So I'm probably more Jharkhandi than British now. And this is the place where I live. This is the district of Bokaro here in India. The nearest city is around 25 kilometers away. This is sort of what it looks like. The pictures on the far side. This is the terrain. It's not a very attractive place to live in. It's very barren for most of the year, and when it rains in the monsoon time, it sort of springs to life and becomes very green. And the pictures on the other side, these are our women's health center as of now. So the top picture is inside, and the bottom picture is from the outside of the building. So my involvement with childbirth, it actually started before 93 because I'd had 2 children by then. So I think I had some practical experience of childbirth. But 1993, I was living in this village, and a group of boys came from the village to ask me, can I go and help their sister who was, this was her 4th baby and the baby wasn't coming out, and can you come and help? And I sort of was quite dismissive and said, well, I don't know. I mean, I've seen birth from the other end, but not from this end. And I tried to get rid of them as much as I could by asking them to call the traditional birth attendant. We call them dais. So the dais, she won't come in the night. Or this old woman in the village who was known as the go-to woman for childbirth, and she'd gone out to attend a marriage in another village. And the government hospitals, they were non-existent in those days. So, I was sort of pushed and pulled, and I ended up going to the house. And yeah, so fortunately, the baby was born on its own. I didn't do anything, though the village women seemed to think I did something, but I actually didn't. And I think since, as is the norm, the babies and the mother did quite well. And yeah, so after that, they started calling me more and more. Anyway, the same day I went back to the village, and I talked to the women, like, what do you do when things go wrong? And how do you deal with it? And they didn't have an answer. And this was a time of, I think, the breaking down of traditions. It was the traditional midwives, the dais, they were sort of dying out. Their daughters and daughter-in-laws were not taking up the profession. But at the same time, these young guys with their bag full of magic medicines and injections, they were moving into childbirth. And we did a study around 84, 85, and something like 85% of women in the villages were getting injections of oxytocin to hasten childbirth. And there was no other examination, or the doctors wouldn't do anything. These so-called doctors wouldn't do anything else. They'd sit out in the courtyard, and every 15 minutes they'd go inside and push an injection of oxytocin. So it was a time of flux in the 90s. And this is when I sort of got my first exposure to what was happening in the sphere of childbirth. I'd already been in the village by then around 6 years. So I'd kept my head in the sand about childbirth. It was not really something that I wanted to get into. Yeah, and in this picture, very bad quality pictures, I know, but she's the woman here, the woman with the yellow sari. She was my the first woman whose birth I attended in 1993. Unfortunately, she's died. She's passed away now, but not due to childbirth. Yeah. Around the same time this happened, we also started getting involved with the village women in particular around the issue of indebtedness. So women were getting organized into groups. And initially it was to get out of the clutches of the moneylenders. But once you organize women into groups of 15, 20, and we had around, now we've got 600-700 groups, but at in the early days, we had around 50-60 groups. Once they're organized, they start voicing their demands. So one of the consistent and main demands from the very beginning has been better healthcare for themselves, especially during childbirth. So these two things were sort of going on simultaneously with the childbirth and with the groups. As you can see, these are the, it's quite a robust sort of community-based women's organization now with around 9,000 members. So when their demand was, we want health. I mean, healthcare is a very vague thing. I mean, in the beginning, they said, we want a doctor to come here. They think the doctors are initially they thought that the doctors are their answer to all their problems. I think it didn't take very long for them to realize that that's not going to happen. As another demand was, let's demand from the government certain facilities. And we went to government offices and we gave petitions and everything. And that also didn't happen. The head of our district, he told a group of women who had demanded at least a government doctor come to our villages once a month. And the head of the district, he told these women that I can't get our doctors to work. So you go and train village women to wash their hands, and that's going to save babies. So we got totally disgusted, and we decided after that the way forward is going to be, we're going to have to do it ourselves. So these are some of the hurdles. I mean, I was listing these hurdles in the last couple of days. Actually, it's a lot longer than this. I mean, massive problems of within the community, external to the community. And these are our ecologies that we're working in. So, I mean, some of these things I'll point out, problem of, gender discrimination in our village. Who holds the purse strings? Who makes decisions? It's invariably men of the community. Women, particularly young women after marriage, that's the time they're least likely to be working and earning any money for the family. Domestic violence, yes. Quite a big problem. There was no, the healthcare which was available in the area, both private and government, both are, at that time were non-existent, and now they're existing, but I wouldn't call them quality. As I said about pharmaceuticals, there's lots and lots of medicines in the community floating around. And you go to a village doctor, he'll give you 10 different types of medicines, from antibiotics to injections to you know, a sort of plethora of medicines are out there in the community. So I would say it's a sort of pharmaceuticalization of childbirth was going on. Because apart from your oxytocin, they were giving tetanus injections and injections of antibiotics, all sort of, you know, as and when they felt like it. The medical profession, I would say, has been more harmful than helpful. In terms of one, they refused to help us, but there are so many obsolete and dangerous practices which are taking place in modern obstetrics, which are really detrimental to women in childbirth, and it also gets passed on to the community. So now there's an idea was there in people's heads that a baby cannot be born unless an injection is given. So we have to then, not only do we try to create another system, we have to undo the damage that the medical profession has done, which is a double hurdle in a way. Things like, there's so many obsolete practices. They say that the traditional practices of the dyes were harming women, but and they're not scientific or evidence-based, but there's no evidence for lying flat on your back and delivering babies with your legs up in stirrups either. But this is being pushed by the medical profession. And I find it quite funny that a lot of the traditional practices of 30, 40 years ago, when I first was involved with childbirth, like squatting in labor, delayed cord cutting, and many other things, now they're coming back into vogue now, as if it's been invented by the medical profession recently. Whereas this was the traditional practice from several, hundreds of years. So there were some traditional beliefs and practices which we, it's not that everything traditional is great. There's not a lot, we didn't find a lot of resistance amongst women to challenging some of these practices. One is that we're embedded in the community, and secondly, there's a lot of group pressure, or sort of there's a whole network of women around you. So you discuss these things. So things like women not eating rice for 6 days after birth, which was a very common practice in the traditionally, which I sort of thought was not really a good idea. Some of the women around also thought it was not a good idea. But once, this was a very easy belief or practice to undermine, and now it doesn't exist anymore. So I think once you can show a traditional practice is not really benefiting you, and prove and stay with women and stay with them long enough, it does get undermined on its own. And along with all of this, I think one of the major hurdles is, in spite of the motherhood being put on a pedestal in India amongst certain people, it's a very dirty profession. So even training of women in our communities to take up birth as a profession, they were threatened by their communities to be outcast, because it's considered it's polluting. Cutting the navel cord is particularly polluting. It's you're separating life and death in a way, and that is for the lowest caste in the hierarchy. Only they will be allowed to do that. So we had enormous challenges to try and promote childbirth as a respectful profession, if you like. That was an enormous challenge, which I think to some extent we've managed to do. So this is our local government hospital. So as you can see, it's not the nicest place to be. Just a few random photographs, and just to show, this is one of the posters we did about, it says, we have a lot of alcohol-related problems. around childbirth. So men who were sad or happy, they turn to the bottle and then, you know, try and come into the safe space for women to, you know, voice their happiness or sadness. If it's a third daughter, they'll be particularly sad. If it's the first son, they will be particularly happy. Either which way, they turn to the bottle. So, and we don't keep sort of guards or people on the door. So anyway, so this is, it says anybody who's found like this will be removed from the premises. Okay, so this shows one of our health workers. We are learning from, apart from involving local women as the providers of healthcare in childbirth, we've also learned from the local practitioners of childbirth. So she's one of our health workers. She's learning in what position they're, you know, giving birth in the village. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I mean, it's a sort of semi-tribal area, so everybody loves to dance. And we try to make birth as happy event as possible. So we dance in the hospital, we dance during childbirth. And this is this woman on the far side. She is one of the traditional midwives. So this is 2 generations. Yeah. So this is the past and this is the present. And I think that's enough. Now doctors are coming to our center to learn from our health workers of how a normal birth should be. Because in medical colleges, normal birth doesn't take place. I think that's enough.